anything to do with a certain religion, do you think?
No,
Is it anything
is it?
like that?
No, it's
No,
more to do
no.
with a kind of a drug, isn't it? It's a drug.
Yeah, well, those that take it ought to be ashamed
Well.
of themselves.
According to The Sun, there were thousands of empty ecstasy wrappers littering the floor of the 250-foot-long hangar.
Drugs, sex, sensation.
Some newspapers have called acid house music a sinister and evil cult which lures young people into drug taking. The message is certainly getting across.
The organisers kept the location secret until the very last moment, which was the main reason, according to the papers, why there were so few police here and they were unable to act.
Drug-crazed kids, some as young as 12, boogied for 8 hours yesterday at Britain's biggest ever ecstasy bash.
The party took place here, infiltrated by reporters from the Mail and the Sun.
There's meant to be a drugs-related craze.
What do you know about acid house music?
It must affect the brain in some way.
Unless it's just the music that does it. Who
All them
knows?
lights flashing don't do you any good either, do it? I wouldn't even go in the pub where them lights are.
Oh, no,
They drive you mad, don't they?
So here we are on my desktop. Before we go any further, I don't normally do this, and this is the first time I've done it, but here we go. We have a new emerging channel on YouTube, and we really need some support. We need some subscribers. We need some comments. We need some thumbs up, and we just basically need some support. So all the podcast episodes are listed. We've also got loads of different podcast clips that we add, that we make especially for the channel. We've also got other playlists here. We've got Acid House documentaries. So all the Acid House documentaries we find, we will try and list on the channel. We have house music documentaries again, all the house music, dance music documentaries. So we've got loads of different playlists that we are updating on a regular basis. So come over to the channel, subscribe, hit the notifications button. Didn't think I'll ever be saying that, and give us some support. It's a new channel, so we do need that support. We are over on the social media channels. We are on Twitter, obviously, so follow us on Twitter. We do other stuff, exclusive stuff that we also produce just for Twitter. We also have an Instagram page. Hit us up on the Instagram page. Look, you can see it's all new, so we do need some support. Also, for our website, you can actually go to our website and get all the show notes and all extra videos and any links that we have and any resources that we have connected to the people that we actually interview. That's all on the 88podcast.com. You can also listen to all the episodes. We've got them all listed here. We've got all the links to the YouTube channels, to the YouTube videos as well. And before we go any further, I think it's a good idea if we started with the part 1 of the media hype. So media hype part 1, I just give you a quick update on what we spoke about and what we went over. And so in the last episode, which it's not really running in chronological order, to be fair, but in the last episode, it was all about 1988. So we looked at It's Groovy, It's Cool, It's Our Acid House t-shirt, The Evil of Ecstasy. We spoke about Acid House fashion ranges. We spoke about the army of baseball bat brutes, the fact it all sounds a bit culty, radio helplines, panic attacks, mass acid house orgies. Now, that's something I missed. I would have had some of that. I mean, we had some at the hotels, but hey, that's different. Let's go. So media hype part 2. Now it's 1989. Woo! So how I'm really going to approach this, I'm going to really approach it in a freestyle way. Most of these articles I haven't read for absolute years, probably at the time when I got the articles, and maybe again when I scanned them, but maybe not, because I actually scanned quite a lot of them. But So I'm doing this freestyle. I'm going to go over it. The headlines, the clickbait headlines are what's going to actually bring me to the actual article itself. But one of the things I will say, this powerful image really kind of hits you, because 1988 was the year when the Volkswagen logo became the smiley face logo. Now, that's for those who are listening on the audio podcast. So it's quite true, because so if you remember on the lead up to Acid House, the other kind of iconic image was that of the Volkswagen and the Volkswagen logo. And it wasn't just the logo, it was the actual symbol that was taken directly off of the cars. And I remember the Beastie Boys, they were among one of the groups that kind of championed the Volkswagen logo. And I've got to be honest, people were stealing them. You know, in Hackney, you hardly saw a Volkswagen vehicle without its logo taken off. It got to a point where owners actually removed their symbols themselves just to, you know, to stop anyone else doing it. So the Volkswagen logo really had an impact. And again, it was the Beastie Boys that championed that. And at the time when they were doing their music, especially the track, "You Got to Fight for Your Right to Party," in Europe, we were fighting for our right to party. And we had a slightly different experience to those in America. And some say that we were allowed to go so far in that we were doing these massive parties all around the country. And we were only allowed to get that far because of the fact that we didn't have police officers with guns. And in America, obviously, they had that. And so it was different. And so the Volkswagen logo, that was a powerful image. And so it literally, in 1988, it was replaced with the smiley face logo. And that's a fact. This was a little bit more friendly to everybody because it wasn't being ripped off of the front of anybody's cars. So it was a little bit more people friendly. But where should we start? Because there's so many different places that we can start here. Shall I start with, because we're talking about the hype of Acid House, and we've just gone through 88, and there was quite a lot of press cuttings for 1988, and there was a lot of bad press, Acid House press for 1988. And so in 1989, there are a lot more people that have heard of it. And whereas the old school firm, they thought it was coming to an end, these newspaper articles actually brought it into the household of everyone in the country. So at this point, everyone wants to go to parties, whether it's in Manchester, Liverpool, Blackburn, London, down south, you know, Dorset. I mean, Wales. It really didn't matter where it was. Scotland. These events were taking place all over the country. Everyone wanted to take part. Now, you had the big parties, the Sunrises, the Energies, Biologies, the Genesis, and some others. And a lot of the promotion for that, well, to be fair, it wasn't like today you had the internet. We had no internet. And we were, although our parties were being promoted up north, say in Liverpool or Manchester or wherever they were, all over the country, generally, it wasn't because we had huge networks of pirate radio stations that were playing our ads. We only had our pirate radio ads were being played in London. So this was really word of mouth. This was people connecting and people talking amongst themselves. And that's really how, you know, that publicity, the fact that it was nationwide, that's how it was generated. It was simply word of mouth. People were so excited about what was transpiring that they shared it with everyone that they could. And that's why it got around the country so quickly, you know. These were in a folder marked Genesis. And so these were some, just to give you some of the headlines that were made for our parties. And I'll start with this one. And as you can see, we've got some few different headlines here. Acid kids are duped. Excuse me. Acid kids are duped in £160,000 party con. We've got acid wins. Village fury over 13-hour acid rampage. New Year terror as steamers run riot. Acid party revelers bid to outwit police. We have an acid New Year. Acid party beats New Year ban. Acid party finds a home. Acid bosses defy cop ban. Ecstasy, the party's over. And ravers attack police. Now, they're all in this Genesis folder, which I've obviously thrown in there at some point. But this one, this bit of clickbait here looks exciting. So I'll talk a little bit about this one. So we're just going to open it and I will read what it says. So the article that we're going to look at first is acid kids are duped in £160,000 party con by Sun reporter. Because that was happening quite a lot back then as well. A lot of anonymous anonymous reporters, full stop. So they wasn't even willing to put their names against this clickbait essentially that they were creating and these sensationalized headlines. And I remember this one because the reason why I remember this one was obviously it made headlines such as this. And I ended up, police contacting me. Well, they didn't actually contacted me. They actually contacted Maxine from Brighton, bless her cottons. And she was originally Carl Cox's manager. They contacted her. And if I take it back a little bit, this party, what actually happened was I was giving out flyers outside a club one day and I was given this flyer and it was really a rubbish flyer on a cheap bit of paper and it was called New World Genesis. It was called New World Genesis and it was called the Mandela Peace Festival or something. Actually, it might be down here. Here you go. The event was billed as the New World Genesis Mandela Field Festival. So that's what it was actually called. Now, I'd never heard of this party. We didn't know who was doing this party. The full story I won't go into right now, but it is in my book. But so I basically met this chap named Steve who wanted to be a DJ, and we met at the rave shop MASH, which was this huge retail outlet on Oxford Street. And it was one of the first places that were, well, I guess it was made and created by people that actually grew from the scene as opposed to Topshop and all these types of major retail outlets. So this outlet was created by some dudes that were on the scene. They commissioned loads of young designers to create T-shirts, jeans, jumpers, hats, and all fashion ranges, themed towards acid house and geared towards that market. And it would be banged out. You'd go down there, it would be, because it was quite a huge, big shop. And you'd go down there, they had a record shop in there, and that record shop was called Passion Records, and your guy Steve down there. And we started using it as a ticket outlet because it made sense to use it as a ticket outlet because there would be people going in there 7 days a week, however long it was open. I can't remember. I don't know if it was open on Sundays. And it was a hugely popular place. So when I would go down there to collect ticket money or to drop tickets off or flyers off or what it may be, the lads there were really cool. I know Steve he's a DJ now, and he plays out, but they were really cool. And you'd go down there, you have conversation, and you'd have general conversation, and you'd meet people down there because obviously no one knew who we were, and you'd stand there having a conversation with someone at the record shop, and then people would realize that you were the guy doing the party, whatever. So you'd get in different conversations, you'll meet different people. And DJs also, because DJs will be there buying records. And this guy, Steve, is one of those dudes. He was buying records and, I was there and, he said he was a great DJ and stuff. So I said, cool, give me a demo tape. Some DJs, they didn't like giving you demo tapes, but at the time, everyone was giving demo tapes. So especially if I don't know who you are, never met you before, you've got no CV, you know, I mean, all the other boys, obviously your Grooves and your Fabios and all the lads, you don't need a demo tape because they've got a CV. But if you have no CV, then you've got to provide a demo tape. And so I said to the chap, you know, get a demo tape. And that was it. I heard no more about it. And then the next thing I know, this New World Genesis Mandela Field Festival flyer was out. Again, it was a rubbish flyer. And it just appeared and it appeared on my radar a week before the actual party. So I don't know how long the flyer was on the market, but a week before. And it had about 5 or 6 ticket outlets on it. So I immediately contacted the ticket outlets just to say that, because it no one would be using the word Genesis. You just can't use someone else's brand name. That would cause you some major issues back then, and rightly so. And anything that's going to have the word Genesis in it during 1988 to 1990, for us, it was almost like a direct attack on your brand, because people are cashing in, and you know, the security can definitely consider it an attack, and so it will be dealt with accordingly. And most of the time, because it happened a couple of times, you know, so most of the time just a phone call was all it actually needed. And that's what happened with this chap. So the first thing I did was I contacted all of the different ticket outlets, said that, let them know that it wasn't a Genesis party, and the odds of it actually going on are basically zero. It's not going to happen. We didn't know who the promoter was. We didn't know where the party was going to be. You know, it was talking about the I can't remember if the address might have been on the ticket, but we didn't know who this chap, and you know, we had no information about it. And the ticket outlets immediately said to us that they hadn't sold many tickets, and this is a week before the event. They hadn't sold many tickets, and that they would stop selling tickets. And Maxine from Brighton said that the police had already contacted her and were telling her that they weren't happy with the event and they were going to try and stop the event themselves. And she was one of the ticket outlets, as I said, on the flyer, and that was why they contacted her. They probably contacted the others as well. So when I contacted her, she was happy to hear from me, because she said the police had already contacted them, and I told her, well, like, it's nothing to do with us, and the odds on it's not going to happen. And that was that. And she spoke to them, and I spoke to her again. She said, you know, the police were happy that you're not involved, and that was it. And then we spoke to the guy. Ended up a bit of a drama with the lad, in that there's all the security. You know, we ended up someone phoning us and telling us who it was, and they gave us his address. And so it ended up, the security was like, we're going to go down there to see the chap. And we ended up in a car on the way to the chap. And it was the chap. It was this DJ that we'd met, basically, you know, in MASH. So again, I didn't know this. That was the first time I'd met the chap. And this was going to be the second time I met the chap. So we're all on our way, and I'm on the way with all these lumps, you know, and they're basically saying it's not going to happen. So we're on our way down there. I phoned him a few times, because at the end of the day, I didn't really want it to come on top for the guy. All I really wanted was for the party to be cancelled. You know, that's all I really wanted, because at that point I realized that he is actually trying to use our Genesis name. It wasn't like a mistake. It wasn't, because I know there was another firm up north somewhere, and they used that Genesis name, and I honestly believe that they wasn't trying to steal our name, and they may not have even heard of us. But this guy, he was definitely stealing our name and trying to cash in on our brand, and that's not going to happen. And when you've got lumps like that who are getting 25% of your profits, they're not going to have it. So we were on our way down to the chat. Again, it's in the book. You know, he was very evasive, and then he cancelled the party. That's the bottom line. So he cancelled the party, and this is probably like on the Monday or something. I can't remember. It wasn't too far after I found out that we got the his details. And on the Monday, so we heard no more about it. But then on the Monday, I can't remember. Oh, I was going to say I can't remember what newspaper, but this was in the Sun. And obviously, it's quite a big piece. And it reads: "Acid kids are duped in £160,000 party con." Now, let me just read this. Con men who made up to £160,000 by selling tickets for a bogus acid house party were being hunted by detectives last night. Up to 10,000 youngsters forked out £16 a head for the bash, which never took place. When hundreds converged on a village early yesterday, they were turned back by police who told them there is no party. More than 130 officers, some with riot gear, were ready in case violence flared when angry revelers found out they had been conned. Partygoers had been promised a huge laser and sound show, swimming pool and fun fair at the event in Newingate near Dawkins, Surrey. One teenager, there's always emphasis on teenagers, and that's one of the things I was pointing out in Media Hype Part 1. There's always an emphasis on organisers. There's always an emphasis on teenagers. They're always 14 or 15. And that was really trying to scare parents to, demand action from MPs, to demand change. So in effect, they were being lobbied, One teenager said, "We were told it was going to be a massive party with thousands of people. We ended up in the middle of a field with no way of getting home." Furious. Another added, "I came here to have a good time, but this is the worst night of my life." The worst night of your life? Dude, you haven't lived, mate. The police have confiscated my ticket. Chief Inspector Colin Cramphorn said, "We are investigating this as a fraud. As far as we're concerned, it's all been a big con. Police seized tickets on sale in London, Sussex and Hampshire by organisers calling themselves Exodus." So remember that phone calls were put, again, this is media spin. It isn't spin from the police office, from the police press office. So you can't really put this on police. The police knew ahead that the party was cancelled. So, and these tickets, the flyer that I received, I'm sure they didn't do that many flyers. I'm sure that those flyers didn't get in that many places. And it was a rubbish flyer. I still got it somewhere. And so the idea that at this stage in the game, I can't remember what date it was, but yeah, at this stage in the game, no one was selling 10,000 tickets up front. Not Sunrise, not Energy, nobody. Not Biology. No one was selling 10,000 tickets up front because at this time, there were loads of parties that had already been stopped. And so lots of people had already, people didn't lose their money on Genesis tickets and some of the more organized promoters, because if you lost a ticket, i.e. if the party got crashed at one of our events, your tickets were still valid for the next party. Just no question about it, So, and that's how it was with a lot of the organized promoters. If we got stopped, then your ticket is valid for our next event, whenever that may be. So selling tickets, 10,000 tickets in advance, no one did that. Not at this stage of the game. So they're saying that, again, this is all stirring up trouble. This was all stirring up fear amongst parents, fear amongst ravers, because they realized that what they needed to do, they'd already kind of created a wedge between us and government. They've already created a wedge between us and the police force, and they've created a wedge between, again, the public. I don't know if I repeated that, but what they're doing here is they're creating a wedge between party promoters and party goers, ravers, in general terms. So they realize that that's what they need to do. They need to create a mistrust of party promoters. And in a lot of cases, I can agree with them, but the bigger parties, the bigger party promoters, that they wasn't doing that. And the fact is, all of these stories about acid house promoters earning huge, vast amounts of money, like this, for example, if you as criminals at this time, they were robbing post offices for £20,000. Okay, so they're looking at these newspapers and they're saying £160,000. There's £160,000 cash, because that's what they're thinking. This is cash, and it's all on the site of where these events are happening. These people, they're all on drugs, you know, drinking water, running around, flower power type thing. I mean, that to me, that sounds like easy pickings for those types of men, you know. So that's what this type of thing encouraged. It did encourage promoters that, you know, had no empathy for the people that were going to their parties. They were doing it for the money, and a lot of party promoters did con people. But I would say, in terms of percentage, I would say that that was a third. You know, maybe a third saw rich pickings in creating fake parties. But those parties, they were soon, you could only do it once. And as I said, it got to that point where a couple of things happened. Originally, when we started doing parties and we started selling tickets, you could go to your ticket outlets and you could get the money up front. Then when all these new stories started coming out, or when a couple of people conned people, i.e. the party didn't happen, or I would say, you can't say conned for all of them, you know, their venue might have got crashed, you know, but they'd already been collecting the ticket money up front, but their venue got crashed. So there wasn't necessarily conning people, their party just got crashed, and maybe they were using that money for the next event or whatever, you know. But so in effect, so what happened next was that the ticket outlets, they stopped actually giving the money to promoters up front. We started creating contracts with ticket outlets and ticket agents, and the deal was that you would get your money 48 hours after the event to make sure that the event actually happened, you know. And that's what it was all about at that point. It was all about a party happening and people being there, and then you get your ticket money on Monday morning when you turn up at the ticket outlets. But so no one was selling 10,000 tickets up front, definitely not. So that was quite a bit of bad publicity. It works for them. Let's go back into feed. So what's this one? Well, I'll tell you what, rather than going on about Genesis, let's have a look at some of the other ones. All right, so in this, what's this one, Ray? This folder is called Raids, and in it we've got a few articles. One of them, the headlines are 30 seized at acid party. Another headline is Big Acid Swoop. Another, Drugs Police Raid Nightclub. Police Smash Acid Parties. Sending Paras to Beat Drug Evil. Let's have a look at this. Now, this is 1989. And this was a reader's reaction to a headline. I'll find this headline. It was the Spaced Out headline, which was a famous front page. And so this is a reaction to that front page. And that front page, which I should dig up now, but I'll dig it up in a bit, that was spaced out, and it was something like, you know, 20,000 people on acid, something like that. We'll dig it up after. But the response to that was, one of the public says, sending Paras to beat drugs evil. It seems the authorities have no problem at all gathering together several thousand policemen whenever the hippies converge on Stonehenge. But they are sadly lacking when it comes to tackling the drug barons with their fierce dogs, tear gas, and the other weapons they use to keep their clients in order. Who is running the country anyway? How can we let the evil pushers kill our youngsters with their filthy drugs? If the cops can't handle it, perhaps the parachute regiment should be dropped in the next bash. And that was a person from Hackney, East London. And that was before it got posh. So, dude, what are you doing? So here they are. I mean, they're saying that we have fierce dogs, tear gas, and loads of other weapons, because that's how it was coming across to the general public. Another reaction is, where do kids as young as 14 get the £40 entrance fee for these acid house parties? Their parents must be pretty slack if they don't know their children have this much money. Now, there wasn't any parties going off for £40 a hit. There wasn't any. And what this is doing is this is trying to highlight parents, because again, they're talking about teenagers as young as 14. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to find a way of making parents responsible, and parents being fined and getting penalties for their kids out at these raves. And this was actually suggested later on. I don't know if it was a few years later, but it was something that was suggested later on, that these parents get fined if their kids are caught at an acid house party. So if that comes back out in recent current times, that's an old one. Another reader said, "What is this country coming to? We refuse to help the victims of apartheid for financial reasons. We refuse to help the Chinese students for business reasons. We campaign against drugs, but let 11,000 children have a night of ecstasy, and our police don't act because it may induce a mini riot. What happened to military backup or our £1 million campaign to crush the pushers? I would like an answer for those responsible for these decisions." I mean, that's the impact that these newspaper stories were having. And it did create an environment. It did push it back underground. Just as people thought it was safe to go back in the water, it did push it back underground. And whilst underground, it did leave us open and vulnerable to organized crime, essentially. Let's have a look at a fun one. Adamski. I had Adamski on the podcast just recently. Bless him. I think that was episode 8, actually. And we did speak about this article. And so I can't remember what newspaper this is in, but it's one of the big ones. It's either Daily Mirror or The Sun. And the story is headlined, £150,000 Adamski to DJ at Disney. Go on, son. And, some of us believed it at the time, because we didn't really understand spin. I mean, we learnt it through Acid House. We learnt it through the articles and the media campaign that was against us. That's when we learned about newspaper or media spin. And that's when we learned how it could turn against you in a heartbeat. And when those lights are focused on you, it can be quite daunting, and it can be hard to make yourself look innocent if you have no platform. And these days, the first thing they do is deplatform you. So even if you built a platform, you get deplatformed first, and then there's no way of you really reputing, or there's no recourse for you, standing up for yourself, essentially. So Adamski looks set to earn £150,000 for 4 hours of work at the world's biggest acid rave. He will host a huge acid house rave at Disney World in sunny Florida. The 22-year-old keyboard wizard from Wandsworth, South London, currently topping the charts with his hit single Killer, will be the DJ at the July Bash. More than 100,000 dance fans will pay £20 each to attend the all-night spectacular in Orlando. Organisers expect to make £1 million profit, and Adamski, real name Adam, will be walking around with a grin as big as a Mickey Mouse. He has successfully negotiated a cool 15% profit deal. So Adamski is getting 15% on top of £150,000 from this £1 million profit. Last night, Adamski told me if they're prepared to pay that sort of money, then I'm sure everything will be all right on the night of the big party. Adamski shot to fame with his Energy single, and the follow-up Killer has been at the top slot for 3 weeks. I mean, that's his instrumental debut album, Live and Direct, has already chalked up 70,000 sales. But getting back to the Killer, at that point, Killer would have been at #1 for 3 weeks. I mean, that's just huge. Well done, Adam. That was absolutely huge. And there's a picture of him with a former partner and the mother of his daughter, Natalie. Hey, how are you, Nat? So that was Adamski. And also in that Adamski episode, we spoke about his front cover for, I think it was Energy, one of his 12-inch singles, the vinyl. It was the bottle. I mean, everybody that knows this period will know it. It was the Lucozade bottle, and this was the story that came out at the time. So I'm imagining that this must be, I think this must be 1989, and the headline is Adamski in fizz over Lucozade. Adamski was feeling less than bubbly last night after he was charged £2,500 for using the famous Lucozade logo on the front cover of his hit single without permission. Bosses at Beecham, who made the fizzy drink advertised by Daley Thompson, bubbled with anger when a teenage son of one of their executives spotted an exact copy of the Lucozade bottle on posters promoting the Keyboard Wizard song NRG, which is at number 12. Now, Adamski's record company, MCA, have paid £2,500 to the Nordorf Robbins Music Therapy Charity. Adamski, 22, tells me, I wanted the bottle because everyone at the warehouse raves where I play drinks it to get the energy to dance. People even ask for a Downsy-flavoured Lucozade in shops. A Beecham spokesman said it was an infringement of our copyright, and we felt that they should make a charity donation. Now, we spoke to Adamski, and Adamski actually said he hates Lucozade. And my generation, and the reason he gave was because, and I agree with him, is our generation, we remember Lucozade as something that you drank when you were sick, when you had a cold. That was generally what was given to you, and it had that horrible taste, you know. But it did make a huge comeback during that period. So that was that. So let's have a look at some stuff. Let's have a look at Sunrise. So here's that article, although you can't really see it because this is actually a photograph that I took of a t-shirt, actually. But this was the famous front cover, and this was in June 26, Monday, June 26, 1989. And this was the Sunrise party at White Wolverham, and this was the party that I'd been to. This was an amazing party. 11,000 youngsters go drug crazy at Britain's biggest ever acid party. I mean, it was an insane event, and that was definitely one of the parties, the best parties of the whole entire scene. And I remember this dance platform. That was incredible. It really was an incredible party, but I can't actually see what it says to read it. So I can't read it, so I won't. But this was this was in the Sun, and this was on the 27th of June 1989, and this was after the Sunrise party that I was just talking about. The Sunrise party in White Wolverham. And it's a illustration of an aircraft hangar, and there are loads of happy people literally flying out of this aircraft hangar. Well, there's only 5 of them, and there's one girl is actually topless, and there's a sign saying White Wolverham Airfield, and there's a dove, and there are 2 policemen, the heads of 2 policemen, and they're speaking into a radio, and they're saying the acid party's over, Sarge. They're taking off for home. And the illustration was done by Franklin. And Franklin, he is famous for doing illustrations for all of the political stuff. So normally you'll see someone of a political stance being referred to by Franklin in these illustrations that he did, and this time it's Acid House. And this was the party that, on the way home from this party, it was on the way home. Well, it's Monday, so wow. So I do remember getting this newspaper on the way home from the party. So that's insane. Or I could be mixing it up with a different story that maybe came out on the Sunday. But as far as I remember, we got these newspapers on the way home from that party. So maybe we had an after party or something like that. But that was a great event, and this was from that story. And so again, they were sensationalizing stuff in those newspaper articles. And this one from the same party: beheaded pigeons littered the floor of the hangar after Sunday's party. Youngsters were so high on ecstasy and cannabis, they ripped the birds' heads off. Their bodies lay among thousands of empty drink cans and pieces of foil which had contained the drugs. Also littering the huge building were leaflets advertising other acid house parties at future dates and venues. So going back to their bodies lay among thousands of empty soft drink cans and pieces of foil which had contained the drugs. Now, the foil that they're speaking about are the little square bits of foil that come out of theatrical bangs. You know, Sunrise had a few theatrical bangs at that party, and at some point or another, they just explode. And, you know, all this glittery foil comes down from the ceiling, and it looks amazing with all the lights and stuff, particularly back then. And that's what they were seeing on the ground. And everyone knows that, to be fair. And the size of them, you know, it was just an out and out lie, basically. And beheaded pigeons, out and out lie. Beheaded pigeons littered the floor of the hangar after Sunday's party. What do you think this was? This wasn't a ritual. It wasn't a sacrifice. This was a party, you know? So that was all lies too. And you think, why would they say that, you know? And the floor, you know, I mean, okay, you saw it in the daylight, possibly. And so for a while, Sunrise kind of became the focus of the media attentions, particularly after that front page. And so they went Tony mad, and they were trying to get any kind of content that they could about our boy Tony C. And so here's a story. And there's a picture of Tony, and Tony is disguised with a wig and dark glasses, and he's got a tux on. And it's one of his many disguises that, I mean, I'm sure he won't be annoyed if I say, you know, that back then he was a hardcore gambler, and he had loads of different systems of what he would do, you know. And at one point he was banned from all of the casinos. And so what he would do, he would dress up as different characters, tycoons with bodyguards, you know, the whole 9 yards. And he would go to different casinos and play, basically. And the newspapers got hold of this story somehow, if that's what they're talking about. Because again, I haven't read this in advance, but let's see. Charity cash row over acid Mr. Fix It. As I said, they were really hungry for anything they could to do with Tony at this point. Has it got the date up there? I can't see it. It's underneath. No. Okay. Charity cash row over acid Mr. Fix It. Hospital deny he has helped. By Simon Hughes and Michael Fielder. Acid House Mr. Fix It, Tony Colsonator, was at the centre of an amazing new row last night over his claims to be a charity do-gooder. Tony, who admitted helping to organise Britain's biggest ever Acid House bash, has linked himself to 3 famous charity organisations: Tickets for the new Acid House parties claimed donations would go to the world-famous Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, London, the environmental group Greenpeace, and a fund called Help a London Child. Great Ormond Street Hospital said, "We had never heard from this man." And Help a London Child said, "We have no trace of him donating any money." A Greenpeace official said Colsonator had made 3 approaches to them and offered a donation of £1,000. So he did approach them. The official said he called himself Colsonator of Worldwide Productions and said they promoted big parties. But she had said that Colsonator had not been given permission to use the Greenpeace name. A detective said if they gave just a fiver to charity, they will stay inside the law. Home Secretary Douglas Hurd has ordered a major inquiry into drug pushers plaguing the Acid House scene. The move followed a Sun investigation into the cult's huge weekend thrash in Berkshire, which attracted £11,000. So there you go. They're calling it a cult. Colsonator claimed to be so successful in casinos, he was banned from every major gambling club in Britain and had to disguise himself in a wig and dark glasses to gain entry. In our report of an acid party at White Wolverhampton, Berkshire, and in our Franklin cartoon on Tuesday, we referred to the event as having taken place on White Wolverhampton airfield. We are asking to make it clear that the party in fact took place on land adjoining the airfield. Contrary to what was said in one of the reports on Monday, the 26th of June, no vehicles were parked on the runway at the airfield. We now realise this would have been a serious breach of Civil Aviation Authority regulations, which could have resulted in the operator of the airfield losing its CAA licence. We apologise to West London Aero Services Limited, the operator of White Wolverhampton Airfield, for any embarrassment caused to them by our reports. So they're basically looking for anything that they can to now discredit the man, and that man in this case is Tony. And Tony was an excellent publicist, and so I know a lot of this he was encouraging himself, and his team were spinning it, and they were spinning it in the best way they could because they wanted to do the biggest parties that they possibly could. And so it was in his interest to spin it. And not only that, it was to also bring attention to the fact that these events were being stopped for whatever reason was being given at the time, that huge amounts of money were being spent on production, and jobs were being, and employment was being created through these events, and that promoters should be given a chance to put these parties on legally. So he was drawing attention to the legalization of staging parties, and he was also drawing attention to Sunrise and himself as an individual. And so now they're trying to also destroy his character. And I mean, one of these best, most publicized things that he did. Again, we're talking about Tony from Sunrise. One of the best PR stunts that he did was that he was invited onto the chat show with Jonathan Ross. And at that time, Jonathan Ross, he was emerging as one of the great talents of Channel 4. Channel 4 was, you know, the great youth-orientated new channel that was edgy. And so it had all of these edgy characters that were presenting different music-related news programs or music-related programs and chat shows, but they were all geared towards the youth, you know. And by youth, I mean, you know, I don't mean 14 and 15-year-olds, because Top of the Pops was for that. I mean, for, you know, edgy. So like 18 and over, it was more of that demographic than anything else. Say 18 and over. Jonathan Ross was running the most successful youth-orientated chat shows at the time. And so obviously Tony got invited onto the show after doing these massive events. And so the headline reads, "Fight Me, Acid King Tells Ross." The exclusive by Peter Willis. Chat show host Jonathan Ross was last night challenged to settle a TV war of words in a boxing ring. Acid House King Tony Colsonator hit back after Ross threatened to punch him during a live interview. Yuppie Colsonator 22 boasted, "I'll give that man £1,000 if he can knock me out." Go on, Tony. Tony's offered him £1,000, a charity £1,000 if Jonathan Ross can knock him out. Go on, son. He's offered to arrange the match at his massive New Year's Eve acid party in London. The row began when Colsonator suddenly handcuffed himself to the telestar during Channel 4's live Sunday show, 1 hour with Jonathan Ross. But millions of viewers watched in astonishment as Ross hit back, "You do that again and I'll thump you." Last night, a spokesman for Ross said that he was unlikely to take up the challenge. Now, what this is referring to is a TV show. They invited Tony on, and Tony handcuffed himself to Jonathan Ross live on TV. I didn't realize it was a live TV broadcast. And so millions of people would have been watching that show. And Susie and the Banshees was on the show, and there was another radio DJ that was on the show. And Jonathan Ross really didn't like it. And the DJ was really taking the piss out of Tony, so much so that in the end, Tony just said, like, "You're just I can't remember, he said you're just a wank or a mug or something like that." But this all came out. This was what came out after all of that, you know? So Tony was then using his marketing machine to get the word out. Again, he was attracting attention to the scene itself and later licensing, so he could have later licenses for his parties, which, that's okay as well. And so what's this one? Con behind giant acid house bash. The organisers of a massive acid house party may face legal action for conning the owners of the site where it was held. Police also want to interview the people behind the party, which attracted more than 10,000 youngsters on Saturday night. The party was held at the White Wolverham Airfield in Berkshire. A spokesman for the local council said last night, "If these people did not have an entertainment licence, they may be taken to court by us." James Mitchell, director of the Worldwide Productions based in Soho. James Mitchell, director of the Worldwide Productions based in Soho, signed a contract with the owners of the site to shoot a pop video. But building giants John Molem and London firm Claymore Properties were stunned when they heard of the party of their land. Last night, a spokesman for John Molem said, "We were conned. We believed that Mr. Mitchell was going to use the land for a pop video." Police were called to the party after complaints about noise, but they denied that drugs like ecstasy and cocaine were widely used. Now, James Mitchell, he's a friend of the old firm, called Son. And obviously, James fronted it out because one of the things that we all did back then is that we had to lie in order for us to get venues and suitable land, because at this point, no one would rent land. If you mentioned acid house, a rave, people dancing in the field, to anyone that owned land, that owned a venue, a warehouse, a massive warehouse, or an aircraft field, or a film studio. And in 1989, they would get as far away from you as they possibly could. And one of the reasons is if they owned something that was licensed by the government, there was a good chance their license would get taken off of them. They would be threatened by police that it would be taken off of them, because if police saw their address on a flyer, for example, because we had that problem ourselves when police, we tried to do some legal events. We tried to do one in a club, and we put the actual address onto the flyer, And, you know, as soon as that went out onto the market, the flyer went out, the police contacted the owner of the club and said, mate, if you have them in there, we are going to object to your next license application. And so that's how, so the club owner just rang us and said, mate, I can't take that chance. See you later. This happened frequently. And so you'd have to lie. And what really kind of excited property owners and, you know, venue owners, whatever you want to call it, was when you approached them with like music business, pop videos, or you were making films, you know, or you were making feature-length documentary films, and you needed to create reenactments, and you were doing it for Channel 4, you were doing it for BBC, perhaps you were doing it for Sky. You had to front it, you know, you had to put your balls on the table, so to speak, and just go for it, you know, and you had to carry that swagger that you had the backing of serious legal firms, because that's what scared everyone the most, the legality of it. And although they were questioning us not having entertainment, our music and dance license, the fact that it could be questioned whether we had membership clubs, so made it, which kind of made it a private members club. The fact that people had membership cards, and the fact that we had their names and addresses, we would send newsletters out, and they were on mailing lists and all this stuff, that kind of helped us. If we had a strong case to be private members clubs, you know, and so whenever that you had lawyers around, you know, the policeman would be quite worried about, you know, whether or not he had any real power. And so you'd have to go in and you'd have to lie to these owners. So you're making a video, as I said, documentary, film, or anything like that. And at this time, Tony couldn't front it, and there were lots of people on the Sunrise team that couldn't front it at this point because their names had been too high profiles, particularly Tony. So they grabbed an old friend of ours, James. James did a lot of original stuff in Ibiza, 1989, 1990. I think he was one of the guys that made the terrace quite famous, the space terrace quite famous. Old James Mitchell. Good on you, son. So that was that. So that was a bit about Sunrise and the Sunrise impact that Sunrise had. So this was all going on, and at the moment there's parties going on all over the country, and this was one of the beauty of it, of such wide publicity in the press. It meant that these events were happening. Yeah, you had only a couple of big ones, or one big one would happen on a national scale. But then you would have hundreds of smaller parties that some of them were geared for 300 people, 500 people, you know, 1,000 people. And they would be happening everywhere, in every county across the UK. So there were lots of raids that were going on across the nation, you know, and here's just some of them. And I'll just read a few of the headlines for those that are listening. I've got 15 articles here, and the headlines go as such. Acid Teds, soccer yobbos turn onto pop cult drug craze. 2,000 acid thugs in battle with cops. Arrests in acid night of terror. Cops back off in acid house battle. CS gas heavies beat off acid party cops. Cops in acid battle. Cops battle with acid party yobs. Devil dogs fight acid raid cops. Drivers acid mob terror. Ex-champ Horace on acid house charge. Sorry, I'll read it again. Ex-champ Horace on acid riot charge. Fury as acid party louts go on the rampage. Riot police battle acid party yobbos. 3,000 in seaside acid riot. I mean, dude. And I mean, I've got a lot more articles that have been unsorted. These are just some of the ones that have been sorted into folders. Regrettably, when I scanned most of these articles, I didn't really scan the dates. So I still got the articles that but they are locked away somewhere safe. So where should we take it from here? Let's start here. See, this is still 1989, and this was in the build up to the government actually created a dedicated police force. And again, this was really trying to engineer fear in the general public that these parties were completely anarchic. They were controlled by gangsters and villains and criminals with their privatized security forces that everybody feared. And at the moment on screen now is an illustration created in one of the newspapers, one of these cartoon type illustrations. And what it shows a militarized kind of security guard, and he's standing there with a chain linked lead onto a big like Rottweiler dog. So this security guy is standing there, he's standing outside a building with loads of people queuing to get into this acid house party. And it's called, and the quote below it is, "And now introducing the new, improved, privatized police force." And there's this militarized type guy. He's standing there. He's got a right helmet on. On the right helmet, it says Security Operations Division. He's got a knuckle duster attached to his belt bucket, his utility belt. He's got CS gas attached to it. He's got a walkie-talkie. He's got a bat with nails knocked into it. He's got a pair of steel cap boots with spikes on the bottom of them. And he's got a chain linked lead on a massive Rottweiler with snarling teeth and spikes on the soles of its feet. And now introducing the new, improved, privatized police force. Again, this was feared. This was all galvanizing the government to actually be seen to be publicly doing something. And so this particular folder is just full of the horrors. And terror was a word that was also used quite often. And this was 23rd of October 1989, Daily Star, on a Monday after the mad weekend. Drivers acid mob terror. Dozens of terrified motorists were trapped at a service station taken over by acid house fans. They pulled off a motorway for petrol and found themselves hemmed in by a freaked out mob. The motorists cowered in their cars with the doors locked as wide-eyed trippies danced around the vehicles, yelling and whooping. Police sealed off the area to try and break up the revelers and eventually succeeded in filtering I'm sorry, because some of it's a bit blocked off, and succeeded in filtering cars of acid fans back onto the M3 in Surrey. Motorist Graham Ashporter from Wiltshire was stuck at the service station for more than 2 hours. He described the situation as terrible and frightening. More than 1,000 partygoers made a rendezvous at the Fleet Street service station late on Saturday night on their way to an all-night bash at an empty warehouse in Andover, Hants. About 400 Acid House fans turned up for an event. Oh, this is another story at the end. About 400 Acid House fans turned up for an event at Briscombe, Gloucestershire, only to find out it was a harmless pig roast and firework display. When they were turned away, they set fire to a motorbike and damaged cars and vans. So before we get to that, so what are they talking about here? So it's a service station. Now, those of you that obviously went to these types of events will know what that means. And service stations were used as meeting points for promoters who were staging parties around the M25. And they were really important strategic points in our ways of getting people to whatever venue we're going to be using in whichever part of the world, whichever part of the M25. And these service stations, they gave you such a good advantage point in that police couldn't really, the way that police were, in the end, they were looking for parties were in helicopters. And so, or if you actually gave the address of a party, or if you were too near to the meeting point, wherever it might be, the service station or wherever it might be, it was really easy for police to find a venue, because they would just create, a zone of about 10 miles from the actual meeting point, and they would search everything within that and end up finding the party. So service stations, you could never tell where the party might be, because we could send you anywhere. We could send you onto any motorway. And if we had two different service stations, one on one side of the M25 and then the other one on the other side of the M25, it made the police's job of finding the actual venue really, really difficult. And so it was a major gameplay for party promoters, and it was a way of that we could move massive amounts of people. And when I say massive amounts of people, I'm talking thousands and thousands of people from one place to another place in a really short amount of time. And what would happen at some of these service stations is that the police actually would create a roadblock. So, and they would block everybody inside this service station. And those who might be listening from other countries that don't know what a service station is, a service station was just a pit stop on the motorway. And in that pit stop, you'd have a petrol station, you'd have loads of shops, you could eat food, you could go to the loo, that kind of thing, really. And so some of them were quite big. They were quite thriving. That they had lots of shops. They were like malls as such. And police, whenever you had problems at these service stations, although because you didn't really have problems, but when you did have problems, it was normally because the police would block everybody inside the service station. And so I remember this particular story. I'm sure that there were some other stories in other newspapers where they were interviewing the normal motorists, because what they're saying here is that these normal motorists were blocked into a service station, and that there were a bunch of people high out of their minds on drugs, freaks, and they were just being a menace to the rest of the drivers and to the rest of the people that were in that service station. It would be loads of families, depending on what time of the night is, but this is at night. So there would be people who are tired and they're taking a pit stop, just to rejuvenate some energy. And so what they're saying is that they've got blocked in. Well, they're not even mentioning the fact that the police originally blocked the motorway. So they're not even mentioning that. They mention it later on as if this was a reaction to what was going on in the service station, when it was the other way around. Police had blocked the service station. They blocked a lot of normal drivers in the service station. And it was the people in the service station, the normal drivers, who were getting really irate with the police. And I remember there's some stories in the other newspapers about this particular incident, and they interviewed the normal drivers, and they were saying, like, why are police blocking us in? They should let us go. And there was no mention of anyone else being terrorized or anything like that. But yeah, so that's the service stations, and we really utilize those service stations. They become a really important tool in our box, And then this at the end, there's another little story, and that one's about 400 Acid House fans turned up for an event, only to find it was a harmless pig roast and firework display. And then they're saying when they were turned away, they set fire to a motorbike and damaged cars and vans. Who's to say that really happened? But what I would say is that I don't believe this story. This story seems a bit fake, saying 400. I don't believe that. That's a big number. But what would happen is, when everyone was trying to get to the parties, if you actually got onto the right convoy of cars that was going to the right party, then you were lucky, because there were other convoys of cars that were going the wrong way. And this happened really frequently as well. People would tag onto the wrong convoy of cars and end up at a totally different party than what they set out on. And then there would be other people that knew that they're having a party, and they intentionally would lead people away to their party, which is a totally different party. And, you know, that's how they got their crowd. But this one's saying that 400 people turned up at this firework display and this harmless pig roast, you know, and obviously we're a bit upset that it wasn't an acid house party and they set things on fire. I mean, it doesn't fit in with the character of the type of people that used to go to these parties. It really doesn't, that they set fire to something. Again, who's to say? I can't say, but for me, this doesn't fit in line with the people that went to these types of events characters. So let's have a look at another one. This is 25th of the 9th, 25th of September, 1989. Fury as acid party louts go on the rampage by Simon Hughes. Rampaging acid house yobs sparked a new storm last night after terrorizing a village. Angry locals said 10,000 partygoers woke them up by blasting them with music, roaring around in their cars. They also ruined valuable crops. The hordes paid £20 a head for the bash, said to be raising cash for the survivors of the Thames disaster. They descended on a World War II hangar at Raiden near Ipswich, Suffolk at 3 a.m. yesterday. Villagers became prisoners in their own homes as drivers clogged narrow lanes. Furious farmers said the louts caused thousands of pounds of damage to crops by cutting across fields to acid whiz kid Jeremy Taylor's bash. I'll get back to that. Other locals slammed police for not intervening to halt the rowdy bash, but a spokesman for the 70 cops who stood by said that they were solely intent on maintaining the peace. Earlier, a mob heading to the rave up looted petrol and goods at a garage on the A12 near Gloucestershire. Organisers of the Marchioness Disaster Fund disowned the event. So this was in relation to the Marchioness disaster, which happened on the Thames, which happened in 1989. And there were some parties that was going on after then, and they were saying that they're raising money for the Marchioness disaster and that all funds from those events would be going to the Marchioness disaster. And this event happened. Well, in fact, this event, the original event, was actually stopped. As far as I know, I mean, I wasn't involved in it, but the original event was actually stopped at the last minute. Like, so on the night of the event, I think a High Court injunction was found or something which stopped the original party. So this party was something that kind of sprang out of nowhere. There was thousands of people on the streets ready to go to this event, and thousands of people phoning up the helplines, the information lines, you know, saying, where's the party? And this event, it started early in the morning. I think it was like really, I mean, the daylight was breaking when this party began in the morning. Where are we? We're in September, so it wouldn't be too dark, but it was daylight breaking. So it might have been, I mean, under here it says at 3 a.m., but it was later than that. I think it might have been like 5, 6 or something like that, as when we arrived at this aircraft hangar that they're speaking about. So I was at this party. You know, I mean, I think Jeremy Taylor, it was for this party or another party. I don't want to be snitching. I mean, it is mentioned his name's there. That's why I might have got mixed up. But one of the parties. Oh no, it wasn't this one. It was, yeah, it was another one. It was another one. But yeah, so yeah. In fact, I told this story on my podcast when I interviewed Jeremy Taylor and Tintin. They were the guys that did the energy parties in an earlier podcast. I actually mentioned to them because I was there, and I won't go over the whole story but it's a quick story. but I was there, and at one point they had this wooden structure. People was all weighing down on the structure, so they were standing on top of it dancing. And again, it's daylight now. It was maybe 8, 9 in the morning, and I went over and I told everybody to get down off of this wooden structure. And about 10 minutes later, this middle-aged couple approached me, claiming that I was the first words they said to me was, "This is your party." And I said, no, it isn't. And so they were like, "No, we know this is your party. Someone has told us this is your party. This is our land. You haven't got permission to be here." And I was like saying, "No, this is not my party." So this happened at this party. And yeah, I would say this, because it was the thing about being in the country where this was, and I would say to the villagers, the villagers definitely would have been disturbed by this, because I must say, all the roads were jammed up with people in the morning. It would have been quite shocking. Again, at that time, people are coming out of their houses in the country. People have been awake for hours, and so their travel would have been impeded by traffic jams, essentially traffic jams in roads and narrow lanes that there's never ever been traffic jams in before. So that would have been quite shocking. If you can imagine growing up in a small, quiet village, with minimal amount of traffic driving through your village and minimal amount of traffic of driving down the small lanes behind your house or whatever, and then waking up one day and there's hundreds of cars driving past your house. It must have been quite scary. I mean, what would you even think? If you'd never even heard of acid house, what would you think? Just suddenly, 1 or 2 cars go past your window an hour, your house, and then suddenly there's hundreds of cars going past at 5 in the morning, 3 in the morning, whatever time it is. That could be quite daunting, could be quite scary. The fact that they're saying that people were rampaging and terrorizing the village, were they terrorizing the village? I don't know if they were, dude. Come on. I mean, yes, they were disturbing the villagers for sure, impeding their travel for sure. Noisy traffic noise, no empathy for the locals. I totally, for sure. But terrorizing is a bit heavy. They probably did ruin crops, because I do remember at one point. Well, actually, I don't remember that. I'm mixing up with a different party, but they probably ruined crops. Yeah. What else are they saying? Villagers became prisoners in their homes. Yeah, I can believe that for sure. Blah blah blah. Earlier, I mean, this bit. I mean, here's the thing. They're saying 70 cops stood by, as their intent was on maintaining the peace, as they should be. Peace officers, that's what they do. But earlier, a mob heading to the rave up looted petrol and goods. Could that be true? I don't know. Obviously, people of the Martinez Disaster Fund disowned the event. Who could blame them? And so there was a big riot at one of the parties. Fantasy, was it? I can't remember if it was 1989 or 1990. This was it here. And this one, there's video. You can watch this video on YouTube. And if you ever see any video cuts, and you see one of the cuts and there's like loads of people trying to push a police van and turn it over, that's the fantasy party. And that's the only time when that actually happened, which in my knowledge, it probably happened in other places, but if you read and if you believed the newspapers, you would think that this was happening every single weekend, but it didn't. It happened once or twice throughout the whole time. And it was the fantasy party. And I have to say that people did get arrested for it, and people did go to prison for it. I know a chap that did go to prison for it. He was in a lot of the footage, and he was quite a distinctive chap. And I didn't know that he got arrested and got put away in prison for it. It was like 20 years later, I was in a bar in Chelsea with a friend, and she's passed now, bless her. And he came in, and we started talking, and I said to him that I hadn't seen him since then, and he said that I'd be lying if I said I remember how much sentence he did, but I think he said 3 years he got for that. So this is the story, the article that I'm looking at right now, for those listening. The headline reads, CS gas heavies beat off acid party cops. Now, this was all the press that was happening on the Monday after the actual event. As I said, I can't remember if it was 1989 or 1990. Bouncers used tear gas to beat off police trying to break up an acid house party. The 26 officers were also attacked with baseball bats by about 60 party organisers and self-styled security guards with Rottweilers, Dobermans and a pit bull terrier. 16 police were injured and 7 needed hospital treatment after suffering the effects of gas. Another needed 17 stitches in his arm and hands and had 2 fingers broken. 2 police vehicles were damaged in the running battle near Reigate, Surrey, and every window in Superintendent John Hoyle's official Granada was smashed. Mr. Hoyle withdrew from the party amid fears that a policeman had been taken hostage. Really. And as the night turned into a bitter confusion, he decided that 2 men who had been taken prisoner should be released to prevent further trouble. So they'd obviously arrested a couple of people, and when they thought that a police officer had been kidnapped or was been held hostage, they decided that they would release the other 2 chaps that they'd arrested. Police were forced to stand back and watched as vehicles jammed the roads and the number of revellers swelled to 10,000. Reinforcements were called in from neighbouring areas. By daylight, about 150 officers were ready to move in on the party in a field at Sidlow Bridge off the A217. Police eventually made 51 arrests for drug offences, possession of offensive weapons and threatening behaviour. Mr. Hoyle said the fighting started when he tried to stop the party being set up. He made a tactical withdrawal because he feared that there could be a bloodbath. During the night, the field was in total darkness, and it would have been dangerous for us to have done anything like move in, Mr. Hoyle said. When we withdrew, calm came, and it was clear any attempt to stop the party would have caused severe aggravation. And this is somewhere else, I think, this one. In the Cotswolds, police found children as young as 12 attending an acid house party. They seized cannabis and illegally sold alcohol drinks in a 3 a.m. raid on a barn near Cheltenham. Another 300 officers from all over Essex arrested 90 people after a coordinated swoop on the acid house parties at Basildon, Grays and Harlow. Police found cannabis, heroin, cocaine, ecstasy. So, that was quite a big night, Partly what the policeman was saying here, during the night, the field was in total darkness and it would have been dangerous for us to have done anything like move in. I totally agree with him. It was in total darkness. You even see from the video, I've been in those situations. You don't want to have been there, But there was, the people that were involved in the riots would, they see it in a totally different way, obviously, but you could see how it could be construed to be quite a scary situation. But yeah, so but there was a few stories from this one party. And I can't remember, is this part of it? I don't know if it is. So let me just say this. Let me just do a disclaimer. Now, I'm not sure if this is the same party, but we shall find out. Bear with me. It's the text is a bit small. So what I'm looking at now is an article with a picture of a heavyweight boxer, heavyweight Horace, ex-champ Horace on acid riot charged. A boxer accused over party. Former boxing champ Horace Notice was remanded in custody yesterday after an acid house battle which left 16 policemen injured. The 32-year-old heavyweight faces a charge of riot, which can carry a jail sentence for up to 10 years. Notice was one of 8 security guards arrested when trouble flared after police arrived at a huge open-air party which attracted 10,000 youngsters. The 6'1" fighter, British and Commonwealth champion, until eye problems forced him to quit last year, was handcuffed to a policeman as he appeared before magistrates at Reigate, Surrey. Defence lawyer David Forsyth pleaded in vain for notice of Defence lawyer David Forsyth, let me make it bigger. Pleaded in vain. Let's make it bigger. Pleaded in vain for notice of Welling Kent to be given bail. The former title holder wanted to be with his pregnant girlfriend who was in hospital. Mr. Fostry said Notice now lives on £124 a week. The boxer from the same fight stable as the Frank Bruno hung up his gloves after doctors discovered the detached retinals on both eyes. It sunk his chance of a £50,000 European title with Italian Francesco Damina. Other 3 men accused of riot were also mechanic Delroy, blah blah, and another one was a postman, blah blah, all South London. 4 other security guards were last night charged with riot. Saturday night's clashes came when 25 policemen arrived at an acid house extravaganza in a field outside Reigate. About 60 security men, some with Rottweilers, were on guard as youngsters flocked to the £15 a head bash. The police were forced to retreat and senior officers called for 150 reinforcements. A BBC video of the scenes were being studied by detectives yesterday. So yeah, I think it is the same. This is the same party we were just talking about. What's this? I was just looking at another piece of the. So yeah. So Horace obviously had fallen on hard times, and he was one of the security guards at this party. I guess it was fantasy. And I think there's another one here. I think this is the same party. Now this article, oh maybe not. This is another one. That's it. Let's just have a quick scheme through it. Oh no, this is another one. This one is on Monday, August the 21st, 1989. I've only actually scanned half of the image, so I can't really get it all. Riot police battle acid party yobbos. Van set alight in frenzy. So it's showing a police SPG van which has been burnt out, and beneath it says, burned out. The police van attacked and set ablaze by 2,000 wild acid house revelers yesterday. Revelers battled with police. I can't really see it. I can't really read the rest of it, but that's some headline. Yeah, I can't really read it. But also a man, drug dance man dies. So a man died at a party, they're saying, in Surrey. Yeah, riot police battle acid party yobbos. Here's another one. And this one, we have devil dogs fight acid raid cops. Devil dogs fight acid raid cops. Acid party guards armed with baseball bats, CS gas, and vicious Rottweiler dogs fought a pitched battle with police and won. They forced police to back down when they tried to stop a party for 10,000 people. Music from the party blared out all night and did not end till yesterday morning. Officers arrested one guard and were then forced to free him to avoid a full-scale riot. So this is the same event. So these were all the different newspapers from that day. I think this might have been the Today newspaper. So these were all the different news coverage of one riot, basically. Here's another one. Again, this I think this is 1989, but I don't know. So 2000 acid thugs in battle with cops by David Wooding. Riot police were bombarded with bricks, rocks, and a sharpened 4-foot stake as 2,000 yobs rampaged through a seaside town early yesterday. The bank holiday clash came after officers broke up a late-night acid house party in a car park. Police were ready for trouble, having been caught unaware last year when disco speakers were set up in the same place. Holidaymaker Carl O'Toole said there were people running up the road with police chasing them with truncheons and riot shields. People were throwing bottles at them. Youths went wild along the seafront at Bournemouth, Dorset, smashing shop windows and wrecking parked cars. 5 policemen are hurt in a 2-hour street battle. 18 people were arrested and will appear in court today on public order charges. 6 police cars were damaged as the mob attacked them. Chief Superintendent Richard Thomas said at about midnight, missiles were thrown at some officers, and that's when it was decided to break up the gathering. 2,000 acid thugs in battle with cops. I mean, it's so dramatic, isn't it? Here's another one. 3,000 in seaside acid house riot. Police fought running battles with nearly 3,000 rampaging teenagers after a bank holiday beach party exploded into violence. 5 cops were injured when officers came under a barrage of bottles, bricks and stones. The 2-hour riot began as teenagers tried to stage an illegal acid house bash at a disused bus station near Bournemouth Pier. 18 youths will appear in court today. 500,000 people flocked to the Notting Hill Carnival in West London yesterday. So this is going to be August 1989. But police reported few problems. More than 100 people were arrested during the 2-day street party, mainly for drunkenness. All right, so they're not talking about other stuff. They're not talking about acid house. I guess they're just talking about generally speaking. But okay, but where's this 3,000? But yeah, but that was the headline: 3,000 in seaside acid riot. So let's move on to something else. So at this point, they started to talk about sending the party promoters to prison. And the article I'm looking at right now is 1989, and it's headlined, "Acid Organisers Face Jail Terms." Organisers of unlicensed acid house parties could face 6 months prison terms, £20,000 fines, and confiscation of profits under proposals yesterday from the Home Secretary, Mr. David Waddington. He has decided that the existing penalties under entertainment licensing laws are not sufficient to control noise disturbance and traffic congestion. Mr. Waddington hopes that a benchmark MP will introduce private legislation to increase the maximum fine from £2,000 to £20,000 and allow prison sentences for up to 6 months. He also plans to allow magistrates to confiscate profits over £10,000 made by anyone convicted of organising illegal parties or allowing their property to be used for them. The Home Office said the new punishments could also be applied for unlicensed pop or folk festivals. Mr. Waddington said in a written Commons reply, "My proposals will enable the courts to hit hard the pockets of the organisers of illegal parties while safeguarding the interests of local communities and genuine partygoers alike." The Environment Secretary, Mr. Chris Patton, said he was consulting local authorities about tougher controls on noise nuisance. Remember this emphasis on noise, because they want to make noise a criminal offence. Mr. Colsonator, an acid house party organizer, said the plans were totalitarian and that his parties were attended by peaceful, fun-loving, dance music enthusiasts. They are private parties held on private property. A £19.1 million program of additional funding for bail hostels, blah, 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 for that's something else. So you can see in this article, there is an emphasis on one, private parties. I mean, there's Tony that's highlighting the private parties, but they also want to throw promoters in prison, and or anyone, because it could be the DJ. If you were the DJ that you were caught in that warehouse and you got there before we got there, for example, you could be arrested, and it was you that could end up with this £20,000 fine. And then, I mean, this was the early talks. After then, they started saying that the 6 months in prison was going to be a mandatory. So you automatically get 6 months in prison, regardless. You get this £20,000 fine, and all assets over £20,000 confiscated from you. So they were coming after the money. The money was, they wanted it, and so they were coming after the money really hard. But you know, what was the point? What's this? Okay, let's have a little look. Who's next? Yeah, this is another article talking about party promoters going to prison. And the article I'm looking at, his headline, "Jail for Acid Party Bosses. A crackdown on the menace of huge acid house parties is on the way. Organisers could face jail and have their massive profits from the parties seized. Ministers are looking at ways to stem the craze that has brought violent clashes between police and partygoers." That was just a quick short one. Turn to page 2. We won't be turning to page 2, but let's have a look. Let's have a look at some Genesis ones. Here's one we did with Jarvis. So I'm just going to look at some of the press cuttings from the Genesis folder. Genesis were obviously parties that I did. And so this one, the headline is "Village Fury Over 13-Hour Acid Rampage." Village Fury over 13-hour acid rampage. Villagers were furious yesterday after an invasion of 4,000 youngsters for a 13-hour acid house bash. Roads into Mepham, Kent were blocked by cars and vans. Residents were blasted by the all-night music and cattle. Sorry, let's cut that and do it again. So Village Fury over 13-hour acid rampage. Villagers were furious yesterday after an invasion of 4,000 youngsters for a 13-hour acid house bash. Roads into Mepham, Kent were blocked by cars and vans. Residents were blasted by the all-night music, and cattle wrecked fences as they tried to flee the racket. Petrol cheats filled their tanks at a local garage and left without paying. There were no arrests. Acid house parties also brought chaos to Shroham, Handcross and Skegness Hill in Sussex. So this party was an outdoor party in a field that we ended up joining biology. Biology, it was their party at first, and Genesis of Biology, it ended up through no fault of our own that we both declared a party on the same night. I can't remember if this is 88 or 89. I think this is 89, and we both declared a party on the same night, and we were going head to head. You know, I created radio adverts. I think we created 3 or 4 different flyers as we was getting closer and closer to the event. And unfortunately, 2 of our venues actually got discovered by the police, and we had no venue. So by the time that weekend came, we didn't have a venue. And so I called Jarvis because that was the right thing to do. We'd sold thousands of tickets, and we were lucky to have sold thousands of tickets, especially during that climate. And so we called Jarvis and said, look, you know, we're sold. We don't know how many tickets you've sold, but we sold a bunch of tickets. Our venues have been discovered. Can we join up with you? And so we ended up doing a collaboration with him. He charged us 5 figures cash up front. I remember that bit. And the story's in my book. And he didn't tell us when I paid him that money. I honestly thought that we were joining up for an indoor event, and he didn't have to actually say whether it's an indoor or outdoor event, because it was all about secrecy. I assumed it was an indoor event, and it wasn't. It turned out it was an outdoor event, and it rained that night as well, so some of the party got drowned out. But I did go down there, and I remember I got caught in a traffic jam just outside the venue from where it was, and we were just caught in this massive traffic jam in these small narrow streets trying to get into Mepham, trying to get into the field, so somewhere you could park, because you couldn't park in this narrow road, because I imagine people would have. And I was sitting in traffic, and we were all in different cars. I was in the car with my girlfriend, and people were coming away from the venue. And so I asked a couple of people, I said, is it indoor, mate? Or, what's the venue like, or whatever, and someone said, oh, it's an outdoor event. And when I heard that, I kind of felt, don't get me wrong, I felt like he tricked me, Jarvis. I felt like I'd been tricked, but, I guess I should have asked more questions, or I guess I should have pushed it a little bit more. So I can't say I got tricked, So it was an outdoor venue. So I turned my car around and I went home. And when I spoke to people the next day, I have to be honest, loads of people were saying it was a good event and they had a great time. So really, a lot of people, I was really surprised at the amount of people that said they had a good time. And I've got some pictures of it somewhere. I think Tabby was there. She took some pictures for us, and I got those pictures somewhere. But this was a story that came out on the Monday. 13-hour acid rampage. So yeah, so that's really the story behind that. So I mean, there's so many more. There's so many more articles to get through, and I'm not quite sure if this is boring or not. So this is another illustration, and this was in one of the national newspapers, and this was at a time again when everything was really secret. And what this demonstrates the fact that there are all types of people of all different classes going to these events. And this illustration is basically 2 people, a woman, it looks like she might be an ascot or something like that, with her hat on. She's got an acid t-shirt on, but you could see she's obviously posh. She's drinking wine, talking to a geezer with a shirt on. And she's saying, mustache, strawberries at Wimbledon, champers at Henley, ecstasy at ... So that's quite fun. I took this out of a magazine. I can't really remember. And it's an illustration of a big bouncer, unshaven, standing at the door. And above the door is a sign that says, a bloody good, expensive and hard to get in nightclub. And then there's someone trying to get in. It's got scraggly hair, scraggly jumper. Come on, mate, let us in. And the doorman is saying, sod off. Because this is how it was in the 1980s clubland. It was difficult to get in clubs. You had to dress a certain way, look a certain way. You can't turn up with too many fellas. You had so many things that were requirements of you. But then there were still companies that were, still cashing in, even at the height of this was for a cassette. I can't remember what cassette it was. I just scanned just this part of it. But this was advertising one of the big cassette tape brands. I can't remember which one. But I always really, really liked it. It was powerful, when you can tape louder, you can play louder. And it's a smiley, and he's like, looking like he's up to a bit of mischief. And he's got a set of headphones on. But yeah, I've always really liked that image. So, I mean, it's part 2 of the media hype. I think I should probably leave it there. I've been speaking now for a bit. I think I should definitely leave it there. I'll leave you with this image. And I think this was 1990. And for those that are listening, the headlines is thousands in acid house drug parties. I mean, that's some headline, isn't it? And we were all young when this was all happening. When these headlines were coming out, I was 22 years old. That's what I mean by young. We wasn't 14 or 15. I was 22, and these events, we were attending all of these events, and there's nothing sinister was going on, especially as far as the ravers. We had problems, so you could hold the promoters under a light, and you could hold me under a light and say, Wayne, well, you were kidnapped, and you saw violence, and yeah, that's true, but generally the people that attended the parties, the people that were raving, the ravers, the dance music enthusiasts, the party goers, whatever you want to call them, essentially, they didn't see any of that. They didn't see any of the aggressions. They didn't see any of the violence. They knew, obviously, not to come into that money room where there's 4 or 5 blokes standing outside the doorway, and they might have looked sinister. But the fact is, how else would you manage 10,000 people in a warehouse that you had just broken into? Our way of doing things, as a lot of these newspapers would suggest, people walking around with baseball bats and pickaxe handles and all these types of things, that wasn't really the way. I mean, I could see, I remember Leaside Road, yeah. And I remember was doing the parties anyway. We had some fire escapes at back. And I remember one time they were locals. It's funny because later on I got to find out who the guys were. Everyone was all local lads, and they were like, mate, and we're like, we're in the manor, and it was in Hackney. They're like, we're in the manor, and then suddenly all these cars are turning up, and they've all gone inside this building. So they've all have arrived, but they arrived via the back door. And I remember they weren't going full hog, but they were trying to break in to the warehouse via the back route. And I remember one time they were even trying to cut through backdrops that we had, and they were booting doors. And at one time we had to send about 10 of our security just out to deal with that. And when they went out there, they were getting attacked and they were fighting and stuff like that. And it was out on a really dark fire escape out back. So if we were aggressively minded, then perhaps we would have had some dudes out there, with baseball bats, just like in what that last story was saying. I don't know, but I can say that we didn't. And yes, you could say that, yeah, but your security had guns, whatever. But I would also say to that the guns were really around the money. And that was it. And the guns followed the money, and that's it. They didn't go anywhere else. They were not distracted by anything else that was going on. So, they wasn't walking around fire escapes with guns, and They wasn't walking around. So the point I'm trying to make is maybe there were people that guarded their parties with pickaxe handles or bats, you know. But I would imagine that those pickaxe handles and bats might have been to keep the locals out, the locals that wasn't taking pills, you know, not necessarily to keep everybody out of their heads on drugs inside the building, you know. Yeah, so that's it really, I guess, for this podcast, which again, these are experimental podcasts. I feel like these newspaper articles are important part of the history of it, because they show an actual chronology in the rise and the fall of acid house, and how the newspapers and the media and the government in effect were out at war with youth culture. And it's clear by the number of newspaper articles. I mean, I'll just give you a quick glimpse. I'll just give you a look. I mean, I'll give you another quick glimpse into another. If you look in each one of these folders, well, actually it's too visual. Yeah, I mean, I've got hundreds and hundreds of articles which I was just trying to show. So we can do another part to this, and so let's do that. So thanks so much for watching, or thanks so much for listening. I hope it hasn't dragged on. I hope you found something that's really interesting. This is all historical stuff. This is all stuff that should be documented. It should be recorded rather than it might be just visual. Now it's on an audio podcast. Look out for part 3. Again, you know, subscribe, comment, all of those nice things on social media. And I will see you again for the media hype part 3. So keep tuned.
Do you think it's anything to do with a certain religion, do you think?
No,
Is it anything
is
like
it?
that?
No, it's
No,
more to do
no.
with a kind of a drug, isn't it? It's a drug.
Yeah, well, those that take it ought to be ashamed of themselves.
According to The Sun, there were thousands of empty ecstasy wrappers littering the floor of the 250-foot-long hangar.
Drugs, sex, sensation.
Some newspapers have called acid house music a sinister and evil cult which lures young people into drug taking. The message is certainly getting across.
The organisers kept the location secret until the very last moment, which was the main reason, according to the papers, why there were so few police here and they were unable to act.
Drug-crazed kids, some as young as 12, boogied for 8 hours yesterday at Britain's biggest ever ecstasy bash.
The party took place here, infiltrated by reporters from the Mail and the Sun.
There's meant to be a drugs-related craze.
What do you know about acid house music?
It must affect the brain in some way.
Unless
or
it's
other.
just the music that
Must
does
be.
it. Who
All
knows?
them lights flashing don't do you any good either, do it? I wouldn't even go in the pub where them lights are.
Oh,
They
no,
drive you
no.
mad, don't they?